A Sherman tank ground to a halt somewhere in the Normandy hedgerows, July 1944. 5 British tankers had been sealed inside their metal coffin for close to 6 hours, inhaling exhaust fumes, perspiration, and the sharp metallic scent of gunpowder residue. The battlefield had fallen silent. No German artillery screaming through the air. No machine gun rounds pinging off the armor. At last, a moment to breathe. The commander issued the order every man was desperate to hear. "All right, boys, time for a brew." Within moments, the driver had climbed out, retrieved a compact primer stove from his pack, and started making tea on the engine housing. The radio operator collected the cups. Another crew member grabbed the tins of condensed milk and sugar. This was their tradition, as quintessentially British as the Union Jack emblazoned on their turret. For 10 blessed minutes, these soldiers could feel human again, not merely cogs in a war machine. Vapor drifted from the billycan as the water started to boil. They did not notice the German Panther taking position 300 meters distant through the hedgerow. The initial armor-piercing shell penetrated the Sherman's side plating before anyone could respond. The follow-up round ignited the fuel tanks. Of the 5 crewmen, 3 perished immediately. The 2 who managed to escape bore burns covering roughly 60% of their bodies. The war diary of the 2nd Fife and Forfar Yeomanry recorded it plainly. 1 tank, 5 casualties, crew dismounted for tea. This was far from unique. Throughout the North African campaign, starting with El Alamein in October 1942, British tank units documented comparable losses. Crews would stop their vehicles, make themselves visible for brewing, and offer German anti-tank gunners perfect stationary targets. The pattern was so reliable that Wehrmacht training manuals explicitly instructed gunners to pause for the British tea ritual before opening fire. A motionless tank with visible crew members on the deck became what artillerymen termed a brewer's ideal, a brewer's target. The numbers were devastating. Research performed by the Royal Armoured Corps in late 1943 showed that tank crews brewing externally spent an average of 12 minutes completely vulnerable and exposed. During those 12 minutes, combat awareness plummeted to almost nothing. Soldiers concentrated on kettles instead of watching for danger. Response time to hostile contact jumped from approximately 4 seconds when sealed inside to over 30 seconds when outside. In tank combat, that 26-second gap represented the difference between survival and death, yet demanding British soldiers give up tea was comparable to ordering them to fight unclothed. Since 1815, the British Army had provided tea rations to every serviceman. By 1942, the daily allowance reached 1/6 of an ounce per man, sufficient for roughly 6 strong cups. Tea was not simply a beverage. It served as a psychological lifeline, a reminder of home, a fragment of normalcy within the mechanized nightmare of modern warfare. After witnessing their comrades burn to death in destroyed tanks, after breathing the cloying, sickening odor of burning human bodies, these men required their brew. They required those 10 minutes of humanity. The challenge confronting British military strategists was not whether crews would stop brewing tea. They would not. The real question was how to enable them to brew without getting killed for it. The answer would demand reimagining the fundamental design of armored vehicles, incorporating equipment that would appear ridiculous to every other nation's armed forces. But first, they needed to grasp just how profoundly tea had embedded itself into the British military psyche. Comprehending why British tankers risked their lives for a cuppa demands going back to the trenches of World War I. In 1914, the British Army made a discovery that would transform military doctrine. Hot tea, supplied to frontline soldiers, decreased shell shock incidents by nearly 40%. Medical personnel observed that troops who received consistent tea rations maintained superior mental resilience under bombardment compared to those who did not. The War Office paid attention. By 1916, the Army had created mobile tea brewing stations that could serve thousands of soldiers daily, even during massive offensives along the Somme. The science behind this was not supernatural. It was biochemistry. Tea contains L-theanine, pronounced L-theanine, an amino acid that encourages alpha wave generation in the brain, creating calm focus without drowsiness. Mixed with moderate caffeine levels, it delivered precisely what soldiers required: diminished anxiety while preserving combat readiness. But even more significantly, the ceremony itself held meaning. Boiling water, warming the teapot, steeping the leaves. These recognizable movements generated temporary pockets of domestic familiarity in environments of absolute devastation. A soldier clutching a warm cup was not dwelling on the artillery bombardment planned for sunrise. He was, for 3 minutes, transported home. By 1939, tea had become so ingrained in British military tradition that the War Office categorized it alongside ammunition as a critical supply. When the British Expeditionary Force deployed to France, each company transported specialized tea brewing gear. Even during the frantic Dunkirk evacuation in May and June 1940, when troops abandoned everything from cannons to personal items, they retained their tea kettles. Vessels rescuing soldiers from the shoreline reported that the most frequent question was not regarding food or medical attention. It was, "When's tea?" The North African campaign revealed tea's function beyond simple morale. In the desert, temperatures within a tank could surpass 50 degrees Celsius. Crews lost liters of fluid through sweating during battles. Dehydration compromised judgment, delayed responses, and diminished combat capability within hours. Medical personnel discovered that crews who brewed tea consistently, despite the dangers, actually functioned better than those who abstained. The tannins in tea facilitated water absorption, while the routine enforced systematic hydration intervals. Soldiers who should have been drinking water would not, but they would invariably make time for cha. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery grasped this instinctively. After taking command of the 8th Army in August 1942, among his initial directives concerned tea provisions. He demanded that every forward unit maintain a minimum 3-day stockpile of tea, sugar, and condensed milk, reserves that occasionally exceeded ammunition stocks. When logistics personnel objected, Montgomery replied sharply, "I can command men to engage without artillery backup if required. I cannot command them to fight without tea. They simply will not execute properly." He was not overstating. In December 1942, during the chase following El Alamein, the 7th Armored Division outpaced its supply convoys. When tea supplies ran dry after 3 days, officers reported discipline issues, decreased vigilance, and deteriorating morale. Soldiers became temperamental, less obedient to commands, and accepted foolish risks. One squadron commander recorded in his journal, "The boys would assault a German fortification for a pack of cigarettes, but without cha, they will scarcely maintain their weapons properly." American witnesses found this bewildering. General George Patton infamously stated that British forces would prefer tea over bullets. He intended it as condemnation, but British leaders embraced it as a point of pride. Their troops did not require inspirational addresses or intimidation. They required proper cha. Everything else could be negotiated. The difficulty was keeping them breathing long enough to savor it. The 22nd Armored Brigade maintained detailed documentation during Operation Crusader in November 1941. Across 17 days of fighting in Libya, The brigade sacrificed 43 tanks to hostile action. Of these, 16 were eliminated, while crews were outside preparing tea. That constituted 37% of overall losses, not from superior German strategies or heavier armor, but from teapots. The brigade leader, Brigadier Scott Cockburn, stated in his after-action assessment, "We are literally brewing ourselves to extinction." The trend recurred across every battlefield where British armoured forces operated. In Tunisia, during March 1943, the 6th Armoured Division recorded 29 crew fatalities directly linked to brewing halts. The Churchill tanks would stop, crews would exit, and German 88mm anti-tank weapons would fire. The massive Churchills could not move quickly enough, even when sealed. Catching them stationary with crew visible was like shooting practice. One company sacrificed 3 tanks in a single afternoon, all brewing up in the traditional manner before being brewed up, in the tanker's dark slang for catastrophic explosion. What rendered these casualties particularly painful was their preventability. Unlike deaths from tactical movement or operational necessity, these losses accomplished no military objective whatsoever. A tank commander, killed while scouting enemy locations, died performing his duty. A driver killed while making tea died because he was parched. The Royal Armoured Corps determined that if every tea-related death had instead happened during genuine combat actions, British armoured capability would have improved by approximately 12%, the equivalent of adding an entire supplementary armoured division to the fighting strength. The Soviets receiving British tanks through Lend-Lease could not comprehend the conduct. Russian crews would watch their British colleagues' brewing ceremonies with astonishment. Soviet tankers consumed vodka cold, ate cold provisions, and stayed sealed, unless absolutely essential. A Red Army liaison officer assigned to the British 1st Armoured Division in 1943 transmitted back to Moscow. The English possess adequate tanks and courageous soldiers, but they demand stopping to boil water during battles. This is either brilliance or insanity. I cannot decide which. German intelligence personnel certainly considered it brilliance for themselves. Seized documents from the 21st Panzer Division contained permanent orders to engage British tanks that had remained motionless for more than 5 minutes, as they were almost definitely brewing. Luftwaffe pilots received comparable instructions: search for small flames or steam near British locations, suggesting tea preparation. One German tank ace, Otto Carius, surname pronounced Kahriuz, recounted in his autobiography how his crew would intentionally delay until British tankers dismounted before attacking. Why fire at a moving, alert opponent when patience would provide you a stationary one with the crew standing around like holidaymakers? The figures grew grimmer in Italy. The mountainous landscape meant fewer locations to position safely, and German emplacements on elevated ground offered outstanding visibility. Between September 1943 and May 1944, British tank casualties in Italy included at least 74 vehicles surprised during brewing pauses. The Canadian 5th Armoured Division, operating beside British forces, embraced the same tea-drinking customs and experienced proportionate losses. Their war record for April 1944 contains this blunt notation: Major Wilson eliminated along with his crew by artillery fire while making afternoon tea. The teapot remained undamaged. That final observation, the teapot surviving, embodied the absurdity flawlessly. Reinforced steel and courageous soldiers transformed into charred ruins, but the enamel teapot rested unharmed in the dust, still partially filled. Something needed to transform. The answer appeared not from commanders or technicians, but from a 28-year-old electrical mechanic named Peter Garlick, who had worked as a tank radio operator in North Africa. Evacuated home in early 1943 after his Grant tank, absorbed a direct strike near Tobruk. Garlick dedicated his recovery to sketching concepts in a Southampton hospital ward. His left hand was covered in dressings from scalds he had received. Ironically, not from hostile fire, but from boiling tea when his crew's primer stove overturned during a rapid withdrawal. The concept that troubled his sleep was not vengeance against the Germans, but rather a straightforward question. Why could not tanks heat water the same way they heated themselves? Every tank possessed an electrical network that could produce substantial power. The wireless equipment alone demanded robust electrical supplies. More crucially, tanks had cooling mechanisms, radiators containing water that required heating in freezing weather and cooling in hot conditions. Garlick's revelation was brutally elementary. Tap into the current electrical network to heat a compact water container. No flames, no exposed crew, no dismounting. Just a switch, 3 minutes waiting, and hot water prepared for tea. He presented his drawings to the Ministry of Supply in March 1943. The military hierarchy's reaction was predictably scornful. One senior administrator at the War Office commented on Garlick's submission. Waste of materials. Tanks are for combat, not hospitality. Another scrawled, mollycoddling. What next? Armored lavatories? The suggestion might have perished there, buried beneath it administrative contempt, except it reached the desk of Major Anthony Norman, himself a tank veteran who had lost half his crew during a brewing pause in Libya. Norman identified the concept's value instantly and advanced it upward through channels until it arrived at the Directorate of Tank Design. By August 1943, a prototype existed, a cylindrical stainless steel container roughly the dimensions of a large thermos bottle, with an immersion heating coil rated at 1,000 watts. The preliminary design could boil 1 pint of water in approximately 2 minutes, using electricity from the tank's 24-volt network. Engineers at the Fighting Vehicle Proving Establishment in Chobham installed the prototype in a Churchill tank and performed trials. The initial test failed dramatically. The container ruptured under pressure, spraying scalding water throughout the turret interior and burning 2 test crew members. Back to square one. The technical obstacles proved considerable. The container needed to endure the vibrations and impacts of warfare without leaking or shattering. It demanded insulation to avoid burns while remaining compact enough to fit into already confined tank interiors. The electrical network had to be fail-safe. A short circuit in battle could disable the whole tank. Most fundamentally, the heating coil needed to function dependably in temperatures spanning from -20 in Russian winters to +50 in desert summers. Every element demanded testing, modification, and retesting. A group at the Mechanized Warfare Experimental Establishment, headed by engineer Captain Ronald Hazelden, invested 9 months perfecting the blueprint. They evaluated 43 different arrangements, materials, and heating coil varieties. The advancement arrived in April 1944 with a double-walled construction featuring a vacuum space for insulation, comparable to a thermos bottle, but durable enough for military application. The heating coil was enclosed in a copper casing, avoiding direct water contact and minimizing electrical danger. A pressure discharge valve prevented ruptures. The completed design could boil 1 quart of water, sufficient for 6 cups of tea, in exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The apparatus weighed just over 3 pounds empty and could mount practically anywhere with electrical system access. Installation demanded cutting a single opening for wiring and 2 mounting supports. Most importantly, it functioned. Trials in May 1944 showed 97% dependability across 200 heating sequences. The boiling vessel was prepared for combat. The boiling vessel, officially designated the BV Electric Water Heating Unit Mark I, was fitted in its first operational tanks in June 1944, mere days following D-Day. The device typically mounted on the turret's interior surface, positioned where the loader or radio operator could access it without hindering their primary responsibilities. A basic toggle switch connected directly to the tank's main electrical bus managed operation. Flip it upward, wait for the indicator lamp, and within minutes you possessed water hot enough to make proper tea. The internal workings were elegantly uncomplicated. The heating coil, a tightly wound nichrome wire comparable to those in domestic electric kettles, sat encased in a copper tube at the container's bottom. When electricity passed through the nichrome wire, electrical resistance created heat. The copper housing spread this heat uniformly while shielding the wire from direct water exposure. The double-walled design formed a vacuum space that accomplished dual objectives. It insulated the exterior surface to prevent crew scalds, and it preserved heat, maintaining water hot for up to 30 minutes after the coil switched off. Capacity was precisely calculated for crew needs. The standard boiling vessel contained 1 imperial quart, 40 fluid ounces, enough to fill 6 standard Army-issued tin cups, with water remaining for rinsing. The container's cylindrical form, roughly 9 inches tall and 4 inches across, maximized volume while fitting into narrow spaces. A screw-top lid with a built-in handle permitted safe pouring even during vehicle motion. The lid incorporated a pressure relief mechanism calibrated to release at 15 pounds per square inch, preventing hazardous steam accumulation if someone neglected to switch off the coil. Operating the apparatus became instinctive for qualified crews. The radio operator, typically accountable for the boiling vessel, would fill it from the tank's water containers during breaks in fighting or while stationary. Cold water in, lid fastened, switch engaged. The indicator lamp illuminated red during heating. When water achieved boiling temperature, a straightforward bimetallic thermostat severed power automatically, and the lamp changed to green. The complete cycle consumed roughly 0.3 kilowatt-hours, negligible drain on the tank's batteries, which were constantly recharged by the engine's alternator during operation. The thermostat proved vital for protection and efficiency. Without it, crews might boil water empty, harming the coil or generating a fire risk. The bimetallic strip, 2 bonded metals with differing expansion properties, curved as temperature rose. At 98 degrees Celsius, the strip's curvature interrupted the electrical circuit, halting current flow. As water cooled, the strip straightened, but the switch stayed open until manually reset. This avoided the coil cycling on and off wastefully. Maintenance demands were modest, but critical. Weekly examinations checked for limescale accumulation, particularly troublesome when utilizing hard water from wells or streams. Crews learned to descale their boiling vessels using vinegar obtained from field kitchens. A half-cup solution heated, then allowed to sit for 20 minutes, dissolved mineral buildup effectively. The copper heating coil demanded visual examination for corrosion or harm. Electrical terminals needed regular tightening, as vibration from driving and firing could loosen connections over time. The system's dependability amazed even doubtful crews. Unlike primer stoves that demanded priming, pumping, and could extinguish in wind, the boiling vessel simply operated. No fuel to transport, no flames to douse hastily when hostile contact happened, no revealing smoke to betray locations. One Sherman commander from the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry recorded in July 1944, "We have brewed up 40 times this week. Tea, that is, not the other meaning. Not once did we expose ourselves outside the tank. Jerry does not recognize when we are vulnerable anymore, because we are never vulnerable." That final observation mattered more than anyone originally understood. The tactical consequences extended far beyond basic crew convenience. The Royal Armoured Corps began monitoring casualty information specifically regarding the boiling vessel in August 1944, 2 months following initial deployment. The approach was straightforward. Compare loss percentages between BV-equipped units and those still utilizing traditional brewing techniques. 3 armored regiments in Normandy participated: the 23rd Hussars, the 3rd County of London Yeomanry, and the East Riding Yeomanry. Across 6 weeks of continuous action, these units documented every occasion where crews would have traditionally dismounted to brew, recording whether hostile contact happened during these intervals. The outcomes were dramatic. Boiling vessel-equipped tanks displayed a 42% decrease in casualties during rest intervals compared to the identical unit's performance before installation. More significantly, incidents of tanks being surprised, stationary, and vulnerable dropped by 67%. The 23rd Hussars, which had sacrificed 9 tanks to ambush during brewing pauses between June and July, lost 0 tanks during comparable situations in August and September following BV installation. Not merely fewer, none whatsoever. The commanding officer remarked, "We still consume exactly as much tea. We simply do not perish for it anymore." By October 1944, as British forces advanced into the Netherlands, adequate information existed for thorough evaluation. The Directorate of Armoured Fighting Vehicles assembled reports from 17 regiments across 3 divisions. Before BV installation, these units averaged 3.7 casualties weekly attributable to exposed brewing activities. Following installation, that number dropped to 0.4 casualties weekly, an 89% decrease. Projected across the complete British armoured force in northwest Europe, the boiling vessel potentially avoided approximately 280 casualties monthly. The survival mathematics reached beyond direct, hostile action. Tank crews functioning in cold weather confronted hypothermia dangers during extended operations. In the harsh winter of 1944–45, temperatures in Holland and Germany regularly fell below freezing. Before the boiling vessel, crews selected between dismounting to make warming tea, exposing themselves to both hostile fire and cold, or staying sealed without hot beverages, risking hypothermia during long static intervals. Medical personnel in the Guards Armoured Division reported that BV-equipped crews displayed 31% fewer cold weather injuries than crews still employing external brewing techniques. The psychological effect proved equally measurable. Army psychiatrists examining combat exhaustion, what the earlier generation termed shell shock, discovered that crews with immediate access to hot tea demonstrated markedly superior stress tolerance. A study performed by the Royal Army Medical Corps in December 1944 assessed 340 tank crew members across multiple units. Those with boiling vessels reported feeling in command of their surroundings at substantially higher proportions than those without. The capacity to brew tea at will without negotiating danger furnished a sense of control that diminished anxiety and enhanced decision-making under pressure. Perhaps most unexpectedly, the boiling vessel strengthened crew unity. In traditional arrangements, 1 or 2 soldiers dismounted to brew, while others stayed at positions, generating separation between those who went outside and those who remained inside. The boiling vessel transformed tea-making into a shared experience. Everyone stayed together, sharing the ceremony without dividing the crew. Squadron leaders reported fewer interpersonal disputes and stronger unit connections in BV-equipped tanks. The 2nd Fife and Forfar chaplain observed, "The men joke that they have transitioned from dying for a cuppa to living with one." Morale has never been stronger. By January 1945, the proof was compelling enough that the War Office required boiling vessel installation in all British armoured vehicles as soon as production permitted. Tank manufacturing lines at Leyland and Vauxhall began fitting boiling vessels as standard equipment rather than field modifications. The device that senior administrators had dismissed as mollycoddling 18 months prior had become essential combat equipment with documented evidence it preserved soldiers' lives. The tactical revolution materialized quietly, recognized first by junior commanders rather than staff strategists. Lieutenant James Holman of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry documented it in his journal entry for September 1944. Remained in ambush location for 11 hours yesterday. Made tea 4 times. Never compromised concealment. Previously, 1 hour was our limit before someone absolutely had to brew. This transforms everything about how we can engage. He was correct. Before the boiling vessel, British armoured strategy assumed that units needed to pull back to secure locations every 2 to 3 hours for compulsory rest intervals, not because the tanks demanded it. They could function for days, but because the crews psychologically could not operate without their tea ceremony. Battle planners incorporated these intervals into operational schedules the same way they arranged refueling. With the boiling vessel, that limitation disappeared. Tanks could hold forward locations, maintain ambush positions, or continue pursuits far longer than previously feasible. The influence on operational pace was instant. During the push through Belgium in September 1944, the 11th Armoured Division travelled 250 miles in 6 days, a speed that would have been unattainable under traditional brewing limitations. The division's after-action assessment specifically attributed the boiling vessel. Crews remained fresh and alert throughout rapid movements. The ability to brew while moving or during brief halts removed the requirement for extended rest stops. We sustained pursuit momentum that earlier generations of armoured forces could not have maintained. Night operations benefited enormously. Darkness had always complicated brewing. Igniting primer stoves exposed positions, and the scent of burning paraffin travelled for hundreds of meters. German patrols specifically hunted for these revealing signs. The boiling vessel eliminated both issues entirely. No light, no odour, just silent electrical heating that revealed nothing. British units began executing extended night patrols and ambushes that would have been inconceivable previously. The 7th Armoured Division reported a 43% increase in successful night operations following installation. Fuel consumption patterns shifted unexpectedly. Before the boiling vessel, crews frequently left engines running during halts to operate heaters in cold weather or to maintain batteries charged for wireless equipment. Idling consumed roughly 1 gallon of petrol per hour. Substantial waste during prolonged pauses. With the boiling vessel drawing minimal electricity, crews could shut down engines entirely, knowing they could still make tea using battery power alone. The 3rd Royal Tank Regiment calculated they decreased fuel consumption by approximately 8% through this practice alone, extending operational distance significantly. The smoke discipline benefits took longer to identify, but proved equally valuable. Primer stoves and solid fuel burners generated visible smoke that betrayed positions, particularly in early morning or late evening, when atmospheric conditions trapped smoke at ground level. Reconnaissance units had always struggled with this. They needed to watch enemy positions for hours, but could not brew without compromising concealment. The boiling vessel resolved this entirely. The Inns of Court Regiment, serving as divisional reconnaissance, reported they could now sustain observation posts 3 times longer than before. Combat capability during prolonged operations improved measurably. The human body and mind decline rapidly without regular hydration, particularly during high-stress circumstances. Before the boiling vessel, crews might go 6 or 7 hours without drinking properly, because brewing was too hazardous or disruptive. This produced decision-making mistakes, slowed reactions, and diminished combat performance. With constant access to hot beverages, crews maintained hydration and mental sharpness throughout extended battles. Squadron commanders reported noticeably crisper performance during the second and third days of continuous operations. Perhaps most fascinatingly, the boiling vessel enabled deception strategies never before achievable. British units began intentionally positioning tanks in visible locations while actually withdrawing their infantry. German observers accustomed to engaging tanks whose crews were dismounted for tea would attack what they believed were vulnerable targets, only to discover the tanks were fully crewed, alert, and prepared for immediate maneuver. The 15th and 19th King's Royal Hussars successfully executed this strategy near Venlo in October 1944, luring German armor into a prepared killing zone. The boiling vessel had unintentionally rewritten armored warfare principles. The British Army entered peacetime in 1945 with the boiling vessel firmly established as regulation equipment. What military strategists had not foreseen was how quickly other nations would discard their ridicule and embrace the idea themselves. The first adopter was Canada, whose armored corps had observed the boiling vessel's effectiveness directly in northwest Europe. By 1947, Canadian military requirements mandated hot water systems in all new armored vehicle designs. The Australians followed in 1948, then New Zealand in 1950. American opposition persisted longest, rooted in the same rugged self-reliance that had made Patton reject British tea drinking. United States armored forces depended on instant coffee and cold provisions throughout the Korean War, preserving their reputation for toughness over comfort. But casualty figures told an uncomfortable truth. American tank crews in Korea exhibited higher rates of frostbite, dehydration, and cold weather injuries than their British Commonwealth equivalents operating identical vehicles, the only distinction being the boiling vessel installation. In 1954, the United States Army quietly began installing crew comfort heating systems in M48 Patton tanks. They refused to call them kettles, but the principle was identical. The Soviets proved most pragmatic. After capturing several British tanks equipped with boiling vessels during post-war military drills, Soviet engineers reverse-engineered the design. By 1953, Russian armored vehicles featured the KIP-5 system, officially the Complex Individual No-Go Pitania, or Individual Nutrition Kit, but functionally a direct replica of the British boiling vessel. The Cold War irony was delicious. Communist tankers brewing tea using capitalist technology, while capitalist Americans finally acknowledged that perhaps comfort and combat effectiveness were not contradictory. Modern main battle tanks from virtually every nation now incorporate descendants of Garlick's original design. The British Challenger 2, introduced in 1998, features an advanced boiling vessel capable of boiling water in under 90 seconds and maintaining temperature for over an hour. American M1 Abrams tanks, despite their crew's coffee preference, include comparable systems. German Leopard 2, French Leclerc, Israeli Merkava, all feature integrated water heating. The principle has become so essential that North Atlantic Treaty Organization standardization agreements specify minimum requirements for crew heating and water systems in armored vehicles. The technology itself has progressed substantially. Modern systems incorporate microwave heating rather than immersion coils, boiling water in under 60 seconds. Some feature separate compartments for heating ration packages simultaneously with water. The British Army's current boiling vessel can generate boiling water even when the main engine is off, using auxiliary power units that earlier generations of tanks lacked. Touchscreen interfaces have replaced toggle switches, and automated cleaning sequences prevent limescale accumulation that crews once removed manually with vinegar. Yet the core insight remains unaltered. Crews who can preserve basic human comfort without compromising safety perform better, survive longer, and fight more effectively. What appeared like British peculiarity in 1944, installing kettles in combat vehicles, has become recognized military wisdom worldwide. The United States Army's own field manual, FM 320.15, now declares explicitly, crew sustainment systems, including water heating capability, directly contribute to operational effectiveness and should be maintained as mission-essential equipment. The veterans who first employed the boiling vessel are nearly all departed now, but their legacy exists in every modern armored vehicle, a small cylindrical container that represents something greater than tea. It represents the acknowledgement that soldiers are humans first, fighting machines second. That preserving them alive, comfortable, and psychologically sound is not mollycoddling. It is operational necessity. Peter Garlick, the radio operator who sketched designs in a Southampton hospital ward, passed away in 1989. He never pursued recognition for his invention, never filed for patents, never requested medals. He simply identified a problem and solved it. His kettle rescued thousands of lives and transformed warfare forever. All for a proper cup of tea.